Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, which is brought to you by SharedServicesLink in association with Consider Solutions. Today we're looking at the 5 bear traps to avoid in process mining. My name is Susie West. I'm the founder and CEO at SharedServicesLink, and I'm delighted to be introducing as our presenter today Dan French, who's founder and CEO at Consider Solutions, and also as presenter Hans Van Nes, who is COO and Head of Consulting at Consider Solutions. So great to have Dan and Hans on the line today. Just a few housekeeping points for you just to be aware of. So please take a little glance at all of that. Key one on here is to make sure that you post your questions really as they come, and I'll put your questions to Dan and Hans in the last 10 minutes of this webinar. Right, why are we gathering today to have this conversation? Well, just to kind of start with some very impressive stats that really represent the kind of the impact that process mining is having on the world of finance shared services and other areas as well, but we're kind of zeroing on finance shared services today. So you may or may not be aware that back in January 2021, SAP, obviously huge ERP giant within the world of finance shared services, acquired process mining tool Signavio for $1.2 billion. Now, the impactful figure there is the multiplier. Signavio's revenues at the time were only really 100 million. So that was a massive multiplier applied there. So SAP were clearly attaching huge value to the Signavio purchase. A few months later, in July 2021, Celonis process mining tool raised $1 billion, and that was based on a hefty $11 billion valuation, making it Germany's and New York's most valuable startup at the time. Around that time came a Forbes article where Alexander Rinker was being interviewed. Now, Alexander Rinker is one of the co-CEOs, there were 3 of them at Celonis, and Alexander claimed that his platform, Celonis, could, I quote, unlock $1 trillion in value for his customers in coming years. So, what are we going to be talking about today? We're going to be looking at why we're all going crazy for process mining, and it really, this webinar is looking to educate you on how to look out for some of the real dangers, so that if you do go down the process mining route, you can do it elegantly and with huge success. So I would now like to introduce our first speaker. Over to you, please, Dan.
Thanks very much, Susie, and thanks for the introduction. Yeah, good afternoon, good morning, everyone, wherever you are. I'm going to turn my camera off now because you've probably seen enough of my wine cellar, which is only a poster, but get what you can. In terms of this session, Susie's kindly introduced us all. So I'm just going to talk a little bit now about process mining, context, and business value. And Susie's touched on that, but it's a pretty key element. Why do we do this? And then I'm going to hand over to Hans to talk about these 5 big bear traps, and we're going to come through that. And as Susie says, please ask your questions as we go through. So in terms of a bit of context, I mean, most people on this call are either in GBS, shared services, or finance operations. Some of you in corporate IT. But in terms of aspirations of the leaders of business services and finance operations, this is a recent poll we did, and there were 5 big aspirations for the leaders. And it's this is interesting context for what we're doing with process mining. So the idea being to have an enhanced reputation as a value creator as well as a cost reducer, which obviously makes sense because we can't cost reduce our way to success. To become a center of excellence with the expertise to optimize and automate as well as operate, which really starts to touch on what we're talking about today. This whole idea of end-to-end business process collaboration, better insight, better ownership, better end-to-end process value, digitized integrated processes, and having a talent pipeline for the entire business. So that already starts to set the scene for what we're seeing with process mining. And when we think about the leadership aspirations of process mining, we know the term itself is interesting, but we're really talking about mining for data about process execution. And it's really all about process excellence, about transformation and business change, understanding the reality of as-is business processes so that we can understand the weaknesses, build continuous improvement programs, change programs, and then get that visibility on process variance, and then use that as a transition to the 2B. And this is a really wonderful opportunity we've got, but there are significant challenges, and certainly Hans and his team have been there at the coalface and seen many of those, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. So Susie talked a little bit about the market. I'm not going to go into this in too much detail, other than saying that Gartner is saying that process mining as a market will grow pretty much 50% a year. There's a lot of marketing and a lot of that impacts pricing and all the rest of it. So have your negotiation skills sharpened before you go into this world. There's a lot of consolidation, and Susie also talked about SAP buying Signavio. Of course, Microsoft bought Minute, and Celonis is an independent player when everyone expected an acquisition. So that's kind of it's kind of a very frothy market. There's a lot going on in the venture capital private equity world, as well as going on from our collective side of the fence. We're trying to drive for process excellence and process improvement. So let's start with what the successes are. And this is kind of really interesting. On the left-hand side, I'm sharing from research the top 5 direct outcomes of process mining itself. On the right-hand side, I'm sharing the ranked top 10 end-state business value outcomes, which start with process mining. And it's really important because process mining itself is, as we say, mining for data about process execution. So top direct outcomes are detecting the bottlenecks, variations in the process, potential training needs, and getting a better understanding. And that's what we get directly out of process mining. The end state business value comes from initiating activities, projects, CI initiatives from what we discover in process mining. And on that side, it's driving the top result there was improved customer satisfaction, reduction in manual work, simplified process, etc. But just by separating out direct outcomes from end state outcomes, you can start to see where some of the challenges are already. And we're going to be talking a little bit about that. So what I would like to do to keep you fully engaged and also to get your perspective, this is all anonymous, but there's 2 polls here. I want to ask first, what's your involvement with process mining? You have 5 answers, they're pretty simple. Are you A, exploring the potential of process mining, B, a practitioner on the business subject matter expertise, the process side? 3, are you a practitioner on the process mining capability itself, the technology? Are you 4, executive management stakeholder, or 5, some other? So just choose one, and it should be fairly straightforward which one of those you are. The only complexity is between 2 and 3. The number 2 is about you're a business process focused practitioner, and 3 is I'm a technology process mining capability practitioner as my prime expertise. So interested in that. So hopefully that's quite easy for you to do. So hopefully you've all managed to click 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. Okay, so 35% of you are exploring the potential. We have business subject matter experts and executive management experts and others at a similar rate, and then the process mining experts themselves following up. So I guess it's not a surprise. 1/3 of you are exploring the potential, which means 2/3 of you are actually doing this, which is great news. So thank you for that. So that's the first poll. So I hope you found that interesting. And then the second poll is, so what end state business value have you delivered to date? Now, bear in mind, I talked about the business value of the process mining itself. I'm talking now about the end state business value on the processes you're focused on. So this is 1, we've implemented some business value, and the business value delivered far outweighs the costs and efforts we put into process mining, etc. Number 2 is implemented, but yet to date the business value doesn't really cover our costs and effort yet. 3, process mining is underway, so we've not yet delivered any business value. 4, too early to tell, maybe because we're still looking, just exploring it, and we know 1/3 of you are, or 5, other. So if you have a think about that. So number 1 is we've implemented the outcomes of process mining. We've had continuous improvement initiatives on the back of it. Business value significantly outweighs all the costs we put into it. Second is we've implemented some business change, but to date the business value hasn't yet exceeded that. 3, we're doing process mining, but not yet got to that fortunate point. 4, too early to tell. 5, other. So hopefully it's pretty straightforward. Let's have a look at the results. Right, so this is kind of interesting. So the biggest one is process mining underway. 1/3 of you, just over 1/3 of you, business value not yet delivered, and another just over 1/3 too early to tell, which is kind of, I guess you could say that's very similar. And 10% of you have implemented business value far outweighing costs and efforts. Okay, that's really fascinating. Thank you so much. And hopefully you found that interesting too. So let's move on. Okay, so when we look at this, we're talking about these big bear traps. I'm going to start talking about some of the kind of experiences people have, these kind of challenges which Hans is going to dig into. And the 6 kind of challenges hidden here are the capability itself, the capability to do process mining, and the requirement for both business subject matter experts, business process subject matter experts, and IT subject matter experts. So there's a lot of expertise required, and that is a challenge for many organizations. The second one is capacity. So how do we operationalize the process improvements that process mining gives us pointers to? And that many of you have challenges in that. Buy-in, stakeholder engagement, alignment, particularly in the business process side of things rather than in the technology side of things, but it's valid in both cases. The data, challenge with data about historic trends. There's a number of issues people have about looking at historic trends and data quality and changes over time. Obviously, cost is a big challenge, not just software costs, which are increasing as the market gets even more frothy, but the cost of storage, consulting, trading, all the things that go with it. And there's another challenge of kind of the hidden IT effort, which isn't so obvious to begin with, all the stuff about custom content, custom tables, custom transactions, things that you have that are unique to your business, your process, your systems, and that has been a challenge for many also. So those are some of the challenges. So that's fine. But what I would say is when you think about process mining and the strategy, it's obvious what the outcome is. We're looking for business excellence, process excellence. But as you start to dig into this, and we're going to talk a little bit more, Dunning-Kruger is alive and well in process mining, as in pretty much every other initiative. And if many of you will know this, but if you don't, it's 20-year-old research, which basically says that intelligent people, like everyone here, has a habit of, when faced with something they haven't done before, have a very high degree of confidence in their opinions, judgments, and plans they put together, which is on the left, a massive confidence with no experience. And if you have the misfortune to have to execute on that plan, as you dig into it and you dig into the real detail, your confidence drops like a stone, to which you go, this is much more nuanced, much more problematic than I thought. There's a lot of things I didn't know, didn't understand. If you're fortunate enough to get to a level of subject matter expert on the right, your confidence increases, but never to the level that you had as a naive optimist on the left. Now that's kind of funny, as in amusing, but it's also true. And it's true in a lot of things, and it's very true with process mining. And those of you in this, I'm sure, will have seen that. Very easy to say bold ambition, and then actually it's slightly more complicated than that, which is what we're here today to discuss. So what I'd say is, given all this is about process excellence, the challenge organizations are having is, ambitions and aspirations are really high because we've got so much opportunity, but execution is really hard. So the issue about control versus influence of the target processes and the target operating model, building a cross-functional coalition to drive business change. It's one thing to find opportunities, but driving change is a whole separate problem. Driving as-is performance improvement while designing the to-be. This is a design versus operate paradigm. The natural tension between process-driven and technology-driven change, and the impact of human behavior on processes and process change. Sometimes it isn't immediately obvious through what you see, for example, when you're mining a process. So process mining needs to deal with all of those things as well as all of the direct issues we have. So, you can start to see the layers of the onion here, why it gets kind of complex. So, come back to a little bit, maybe Dunning-Kruger again. We talk about business process to each other and we all nod, yes, I know what you mean. But do we actually know what we mean when we use these terms? And I've just got a few examples here. Is it a set of actions or steps? Is it a system workflow? Is it the way SAP works to deliver whatever it is, get a payment received? Is it a set of activities which produce a business result? And I think it becomes very, very important when we start looking at process mining to be clear what we mean by a business process, because I'm not going to read the second half of this, you can read it yourself, but it's really interesting that processes include things that go through our core systems and also things, decisions that are made by individuals. There's a human factor. There's a lot of stuff going on here. So it's important for us to think clearly when we're mining processes and we're thinking about the to-be process, what, to include all of the elements of that, not just the bits that might exist in our system. So we all know what a global process looks like. This is an end-to-end process. This one happens to be source to pay, but you can have the same for order to cash or record to report or hire to retire and so on. The key point is we know that the end-to-end process is complex. It goes through lots of different stakeholders and participants, and the data changes over time, and often the systems change between various elements of it. So there's lots of scope for complexity, to say the least. So that's the dynamics there. And here's a little survey that was done recently about process excellence, and it very much applies as very relevant to process mining. And in terms of asking what are the priorities for this end-to-end process integration optimization, which ultimately is what we're all trying to do to get process and business excellence, is trying to get the whole value streams to connect to each other or connect end-to-end so we get efficiency and effectiveness. And the number one priority was transparency and visibility of process. So that plays beautifully to what we're trying to do with process mining. I mean, those other ones are interesting as well, but there's a lot on our side, so that's good news. But coming back to Dunning-Kruger, the challenge for process mining, as for a number of other initiatives, is that a lot of the obvious answers, or when you ask the key questions, a lot of the answers come back very obvious and very simple and kind of immediate reaction, but a lot of those simple answers are just plain wrong. And the irony is with this, and this is the real trick, is the right answers are usually a bit more complex, a bit more nuanced, and that road less traveled on the right hand side is where we need to be. So that's really what we're here to do today, to discuss those very topics. And with that, I'm going to ask Hans, from the experience of him and his team, to talk about those 5 bear traps. Over to you, Hans.
Thank you, Dan. These bear traps are, in fact, a summary of observed and commonly reported elements. We just grouped them to make them more insightful. And of course, there are many more details and differences if you would dive into a specific organization for it. The first bear trap is around expectations and received wisdom. And I've summarized that in 3 slides. First, to look at what is advertised around process mining. Well, it sounds all very simple when you hear what it can do and when you see the pizza examples. But as you can see at the elements to the right, it is far more complex, and it needs far more input and business understanding than you would think of. It is not just applying the technology, it is also interpreting the outcome of the technology. For that, you need another kind of capability. The second element in this, when you start using process mining, you think it would be straightforward and would be applicable to almost every situation. But that's surely not the case. If you take the example, for instance, that the outcome of the process mining exercise might indicate a very logical anomaly or outlier, that same anomaly or outlier may be there for a very good reason. Historical, maybe also because of the market that you're dealing with. So it's not always that obvious that during the usage you will get straight outcomes that you can take further. And the third element is there are some unexpected effects that you will see. It's certainly not a wonder pill, and you have to watch out that, for instance, what you have discovered and what makes sense and what is even correctly interpreted will not always be accepted by the organization as a change that you can implement or that they want to implement. So in summary, bear trap 1 for me is it's all about a reality check. Bear trap 2, business process understanding, and Dan indicated that a little bit in his introduction. But what we see is that the business processes are getting more and more complex. And we have to find out not only what we mean by the process, but why we would like to mine it. Do we do it for output improvement or cost ratio improvement? That makes a big difference. For whom are we mining? For the process owner, the capability owner, the services owner, or a combination of those? And what are we mining? Which scope, which objects of mining, and do we look only at the automated or also at the manual or hybrid elements in that process? If you don't spend time upfront looking at that, you run quite some risks. It might be so that you come up with a nice technocratic solution that is not useful for the organization or will not be accepted by the organization. It can be so that your scope is too limited to give end-to-end business value in your process change. And it could be so that people would ask you, well, I could use my effort and my money to do other things around this. So for me, Bear Trap 2, I would summarize as look twice before you leap. Bear Trap 3, performance versus defects. I love this picture by Tom Fishburne, and it shows the idiocracy of dashboards and what I would call KPI galore. We have so many nice images there of how we're doing that we get a false sense of the reality. Because if you dive under these nice measures, a KPI that says it's 83% good is a meaningless KPI. Or if it's a traffic light indicator, green might be nice, but it doesn't tell you everything, apart from the fact that KPIs can conflict between each other, given that they are used by different stakeholders. We think that defects are a far more important element on performance. You can see the list there, how defects impact performance, and we think that there should be a completely different balance in how you look upon KPIs versus defects. An analogy from the car business. Yes, of course, you need to know how fast you're driving or what RPMs your engine are making, but you should also be warned that something might go wrong. There is a defect or a potential defect, and early warning for that is good. And even prevention, maybe the computer in your car is smart enough to stop the engine if it's a really serious problem before it breaks down completely. And you have to think about the cure of your defects. Make sure that you repair them and hopefully also prevent them from happening again. And don't forget that the world is dynamic. Even when you're driving a car, you have your GPS system, and that allows you to switch routes dynamically because there is a traffic jam ahead, or if you just decided to drive the eco route today and not the fastest. I would then summarize Bear Trap 3 as performance is much more than looking at your KPIs. Bear Trap 4, hidden meaning in data. Data is everywhere. Data masses. The biggest problem with data is the understanding of the data. It's not that obvious sometimes. And especially when multiple stakeholders look upon the same data element, they might use literally different languages for it, different understanding, which might require an equivalent to Rosetta's stone. Troubling in that aspect is that often there is a lot of hidden meaning of that data, unknown, undocumented, and you need sometimes deep business knowledge, historical business knowledge, to find out what the data is really meaning. And that is something completely different from the more technical data analytic focused capabilities that you also need. We use this image quite often as a simple way of explaining that even the simplest of questions can have many valid answers. And you have to really look at the context in which the question is asked and by whom the question is asked to give the right answer, or maybe give multiple right answers. Also, data as such is just the basis to create insight, because only the insight in the data usage will give you the capability to change your process to maximize the output of that process. You need multiple steps from the selection of the data until the visualization on the data in a manner that can be understood by the business. And this is really getting complex with multiple variants, processes, data, optional elements, application instances, organizational units that all have a different meaning. Process mining can really help here, but from the outside, you often simplify where you have to look for the data and assume that the data that you can mine is indeed straight understandable. I would say data is gold as a summary for this bear trap. Data is gold, but mining is hard work. Bear trap 5, time to value and opportunity cost. Sometimes in IT, and I have a long history in IT, we have a perfect new technology or methodology, and we use it as a hammer to drill in all kinds of elements to fasten stuff, but not necessarily we using that hammer for in its best usage for the best things. Process mining is very useful, but it's certainly not a tool for everything, and it is certainly not a tool that resolves all. And one of the elements in that is how long does it take to get to a result. Dan made already a nice distinction between the outcome of process mining and the business value realized with what you found in process mining. This is a simple piece of research that states how long does it take from your process mining project start till the moment you have an agreed plan for change. And you see that it is for the majority a year or more before you are even there. It is very difficult to find data on the time taken from value identified to value realized for the simple reason the change can be very big, like outsourcing a complete process, or very small, just retraining the people. Weirdly enough, there is not much publicized on this element. Another element with time is that how longer it takes to deliver a solution, the lower the value is, because the value versus the ROI decreases, but maybe even the momentum is gone, the momentum for change, or there is even a more important change to be adopted by the organization, and the one you propose from your process mining exercise comes in too late. I'm coming back to the some of the elements that Dan mentioned that were noted by people, observed by people as potential risks in process mining projects. It's again about this capability, capacity, buy-in, historic data, and cost approval cycles. And you can read for yourself the various elements that fall under there. These are all moving panels in themselves, and together it makes it a very complex situation. And to summarize Bear Trap 5 for me, I would say process mining technology is probably the least of your worries in a process mining driven project. Back to you, Dan.
Thanks very much, Hans. That was a great dig into those 5 bear traps. I'm going to talk a little bit now about what we're going to do about it. What are our strategies to avoid the 5? And I know those of you who've been through the process will recognize those 5 with some heartfelt emotion. So these are the 5 bear traps. So Hans has talked through them. I'm just going to talk now about the strategies to address these. So strategy number 1 about combating this expectations and received wisdom challenge. So the big thing is do not get into the how, do not get into the process mining minutiae before you've understood the why, what, and who. You've agreed that with all stakeholders. You want to make sure you engage process-specific stakeholders as a powerful coalition before you start, preferably before you even invest in process mining technologies. That's the execs, the functional leaders, the service delivery leaders, the global process owners. These are the people who are going to make the value delivery come alive. And because it's about this coalition, it's more about EQ, about emotional intelligence, than it is about IQ. So really make sure you're putting your teams together and your leadership together around process mining with that in mind. And that little picture at the bottom is kind of a little iceberg about, about EQ. When we get reactions that a stakeholder or a business participant doesn't seem very keen to take on our, the opportunity we're driving, there's some reasons for that, and we want to, that's EQ, understanding why that might be. So number one, definitely focus on the why, what, and who before you worry about the how. Number two, business process understanding. It's easy to believe that the process mining will give us a process understanding. Well, it does one perspective of it, but it is not complete. So you've got to have that holistic view of what does good look like, what do the stakeholders believe a good outcome of this end-to-end process is, not just the task, but the end-to-end process. What does that end-to-end process look like? What are the journeys through that process? And definitely map them out, because that will help you validate the data you get from process mining. Don't assume process mining will give you all of that, because remember, not all of the process execution is actually existing within your system. There are decisions being made. And then that role of the people, process, data, and technology. So that's a pretty key thing. This is about tools that help balance or kind of combine with the process mining technology to give you a much greater chance of success. Strategy number three, Hans talked about this. Absolutely avoid the tendency to focus on output indicators. It really doesn't help. It always seems like it does, but it doesn't. You've got to focus 80–90% of your time on process mining to expose defects rather than to expose what's good, because defects are the fuel for continuous improvement. Absolutely key. Otherwise, you end up with kind of a bit of a so what outcome. Strategy number four, the hidden meaning in data. Hans described this really well with how many countries are in the world, 6 valid answers. So you've got to have data thinking as part of your team. I mean, deep data thinking. That's deep business process and business data expertise. So you need to have that. So what does the data really mean? How is it used in the business? What decisions are made with it? And you've got to combine that with the deep data analysis subject matter expertise from a technical point of view. What are the tables of fields? How are they structured? And you've got to make sure those two views are compared, because sometimes we get into lots of hot water because those things don't actually line up properly. And you've got to augment that with your process mining technology subject matter experts. So you've got a minimum of 3 deep experts you've got to combine. You've got to look at the data lifecycle. You've got to look at the origin, what changes, the meaning of it. So what, how does an invoice come to life? Through what does it change? What does it mean at different stages of its life? What are different types? All that stuff we've got to understand and expect data quality gaps and be aware of how to deal with them. And 5, the time to value and opportunity cost, which essentially, in my mind, is this number, this challenge 5, and the strategy to attack it is almost like the overarching issue. Because time to value is, everything else sort of falls under this in some respect. And this is, if you like, a playbook to help you drive that kind of capability. It combines the powerful coalition, the start with why. It combines the idea of mapping processes and journeys and what good looks like and all that stuff. It thinks about how to balance EQ and IQ. And thinks of smart mining options. Not everything, you don't necessarily have to go to first principles for everything. So that, I think, is a very key thing. And most of the time, and I think you'll agree with this if you've been experienced in process mining, most of the time we tend to start a POC with, let's focus on something, let's get the data and see what we can do with it. And we miss some of these elements. So pretty critically, the issue here is a Pareto principle issue. We have to find ways, and we call it smart mining, we have to find a way of driving 80% of the value with 20% or less of the cost, effort, and cycle time. And that's not just value in producing the mining outcome, it's delivering the business value of the process change that depends on it. Absolutely critical. So the green line is what matters, and we have got to get out of these kind of red line initiatives. So take too long. And the last 2 years, if it's taught us anything, is, you know, an initiative that takes a year or 18 months might become completely irrelevant in 3 or 4 months because of a big change, as we found in March 2020. So these are the 5 strategies for success. Avoiding, but that's a summary of them. We talked in a little bit about those. Actually, I'll just let you think about that, and because those are the big challenges, the big bear traps, and the 5 strategies. And have a think about that, because these are critical things. And as Hans said, the technology itself is actually the least of your problems. So we've talked about strategies, we've talked about the bear traps. A few thoughts for the road, and I'll hand back to Susie. I do think skills are a key thing, both leadership skills and execution skills. We need the IQ to be able to deal with the detailed issues in the lines, and be able to get the 50,000 foot view over the process. That's an intellectual exercise and a practical exercise, but also got to combine that with the EQ to be able to build the coalition and drive change and deliver the business value. In terms of how can we help, if you like the idea of, if you recognize some of those issues we talked about, and you want to develop your own playbook to help your journey better, then that's the kind of thing that we can advise on and help you with. So you see on the right, strategy number 5, that summarizes that, and the Pareto principle and the smart mining ideas. But there are no quick fixes, right? We constantly, see a bright new vision that says, oh, this is going to solve all our problems, right? And it happens all the time in industry and in technology. But the reality is there are no quick fixes. When we solve one problem, we expose others. That's okay. That is progress, and that is the ultimate, continuous improvement approach. And I like this quote because it comes from the world of medicine, not the world of business, but it's just as valid in the work that we do. So that's what we've talked through. I hope you've been asking your questions. I will hand back to Susie to moderate the questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Hans and Dan. So lots of good questions that have come through. If you haven't already had a chance to post your question, please do so. So let's kick off with the first question. Coming up on this, well, sorry, it's not coming up on the screen at all. I'm going to ask it to you. So process mining through exposed defects, Dan. So KPIs that sounds like KPIs don't necessarily have much of a role. Could you elaborate if KPIs are necessary at all, and if so, which ones should you focus on?
Well, I'll give you my take on that. Our focus on KPIs being dangerous is that we all know, as Hans indicated with his image, we are bombarded with demands for KPIs. So we've got to measure for this and measure for that. And a lot of the time, and this is just in operating processes in general in business, and a lot of the time the KPIs aren't well thought out. They're conflicting. They don't necessarily contribute to the positive outcome, the end positive outcome. So if you're trying to improve a process, obviously the outcome of improving the process will be end state measures will get better. But the only way you can improve a process is by finding out what's wrong with it. It's kind of the classic Lean Six Sigma thing. You've got to focus on what's wrong, and then the goodness will come out. If you focus on KPIs as the primary effort, you end up looking at the wrong things. So what I'm not talking about the performance measures of process mining itself. I'm talking the performance measures of the process that you are mining. So focus on defects of the process you're mining rather than the performance measures, and you will be much more successful. Hans, you got any observations on that, or does that reflect your view?
Yeah, I agree. There is a mix, and depending on the type of process, the mix might be that you focus 90% of defects or 70% of defects. KPIs are good summarizing measures to validate if you have had success by addressing your defects. So there is a role for KPIs, but in my observation, less is more. It's better to have less KPIs that everybody understands and agrees, and I have no unintended consequences or blocking elements. That's fine. So a mixed but good balance.
Okay. So next question, how do you think about the offline, off-system parts of the process when searching for defects?
I mean, I would say that obviously offline, off system, you're not going to mine that through artifacts in a system. So that's one of the reasons why the journey mapping becomes so key, because part of the journey mapping is to map out the stages of the journey, the process, the process variants, and work out where key decisions are made, because that's usually where the off system input is, where key decisions are made. Hans, any thoughts?
Yeah, indeed. Journey mapping is very important to that. It augments the hard data that process mining can give you, and it talks indeed about accountability, perception of quality, perception of service, also from the stakeholders outside your organization. So those are valuable additional attributes that can help you to achieve change.
That's great. Are projects being led by IT? Do you recommend that's the best place where the project should be driven from?
That's an interesting one. Yeah. I think it depends a bit on your organization, but the strong point of having a process mining project led by the business owner, process owner, could give you a bigger chance of the acceptance of the proposed changes that come out of the process mining. If it would be a purely IT-driven activity, then selling the solution is far, far more complex. Of course, you need both skills, but in general, I would prefer to have the business side leading, but it can be dependent a bit on the scope of your process mining project and the type of organization. Dan, anything to add?
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things is, in line with most expensive technologies, you're talking about a capital expenditure request for a process mining solution typically. And CapEx for technology tends to sit in the CIOs group, which we kind of know. And as a result, it quite often ends up being owned and delivered there. And I reiterate Hans's point, even if your investment mechanism is via IT, make absolutely sure the delivery mechanism is led by as close to the business as you can get, maybe in GBS itself, maybe in lines of business, depending on what the process is. But obviously, there's got to be some coordination and governance function across all of the processes that you're applying process mining to.
Great. What do you build the business case on if you don't know what the defects are?
Well, that's a very good question. Right now, most of the business cases for process mining are built fairly speculatively based on case study experience. So most business cases today, and frankly, if you look at the business case for any large investment, it's kind of true as well. There is a kind of a level of hope and expectation involved, and usually you don't know exactly all the things that are going to be solved. But one of the mechanisms for addressing that is the kind of one of the smart mining approaches we alluded to is have a very rapid route through one of the processes to identify some quick wins, deliver them, and actually achieve some outcomes without investing capital on process mining technology, to then prove that you have the ability to execute and deliver the CI initiatives, so the improvement initiatives. And on the back of that, you've got real evidence, and then you say, right, now, what does that business case look like if we extrapolate that to other processes? Obviously, you will not know the detail of every issue until you've done the process mining. So that you're right to that extent, but you can do more to drive an understanding and evidence you can deliver against it, because the value isn't in mining, it's on the delivery of value.
Yeah. Is this why would you actually recommend a proof of concept?
Certainly a proof of concept, but not necessarily. Most of the proof of concepts tend to be rather techno heavy. I would focus on a proof of concept that's end to end, that along the lines we put in that holistic end-to-end plan.
Yeah. Great. So moving on, process mining, process mapping, process ownership, how would you define the real difference really between the three and where they overlap?
Yeah, I mean, we do love our little little phrases and acronyms and all the rest of it. I think it's interesting. I had a number of discussions with folks about process mapping, process mining, and we've kind of touched a bit on that. Some people get confused. Are they the same thing? I mean, process mapping is very much about our journey approach we described. You know, you've got a process, whatever it is, you've got order to cash. Even the best order to cash process in the world has multiple valid journeys through it. And each of those journeys, you've got to be able to map those out, as we said before. You've got to map those out. Now, mining is about, as you say, mining for data about process execution from the operational systems. So there's a separation between the mapping, the understanding of the end-to-end holistic process, and the mining of the operational data. And they are both tools that a global process owner should use to enhance and optimize and transform the process under their governance. So the global process owner should be the person driving this overall change for process and the improvement in performance. And process mining and process mapping are both techniques that you can use, and you should use them together.
Great. Anything to add, Hans?
No, that would be a repetition.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, great. We are going to leave it there. And thank you so much, Dan and Hans. And viewers, please do reach out to Dan and or Hans if you have any further questions. Their contact details are there. Thank you for your time and attention today. We look forward to welcoming you at our next webinar, which is taking place next week on intercompany. So please do attend. Thanks for your time and attention today, everybody, and we look forward to welcoming you next time. Thank you and goodbye.